The world is waking up, and you finding your way here today is no coincidence. The spirit world always has a way of guiding us where we most need to be at the absolute perfect time. I'm your host, Lindsay Morlock, and you're listening to the Guided Podcast, where we explore how the spirit world works on our behalf to guide us along our paths. This is where you'll learn how to live a life that is both conscious and connected, so you can supercharge your pathway to healing and open to life's magic and miracles. Come along this journey to see how guided you truly are. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Guided Podcast. And this week, I am thrilled for you to meet Tia Meredith. Tia is a healer, a writer, and a leader, and an all-around fabulous human and soul. She makes me laugh. Her writing strikes me to my core, and I know you're going to love this episode as much as I do. Now, to preface this conversation, I have to apologize in advance for my audio quality. We actually recorded this during Mercury retrograde, and I seem to be having some tech issues on my end that we didn't detect at the time. That said, luckily, Tia is doing the majority of the speaking during our time together, so it won't be painful to listen to. Her audio is great, so I really hope you'll stick with us because Tia's story and her wisdom are way too important not to share with the world. So here we go. Now, Tia and I met years ago in an online class, and I knew at the time she was a kindred spirit and that our paths were coming together at that time for some future reason. And I didn't know what that reason was at the time, but one of those reasons I've come to learn is that Tia is someone who has helped me truly find the courage to use my voice, particularly in written form. And she has this superpower when it comes to helping people feel seen, feel heard, and feel validated, and being able to hold the most loving space for you while simultaneously reminding you why you are a warrior and why your voice matters. So her approach was so helpful to me in arriving at a place of self-acceptance around some of my own experiences in my life. And so I think it's only fitting that one of the many hats that Tia wears is as a courage coach. So a little bit more about Tia. She was born and raised in Missouri and over time found her way across the US and now across the ocean to Croatia. And so living as a digital nomad, she works as a marketing director for a well-known spiritual publisher, but has finally come out of the closet as a healer through her training in Transference Healing. You can find out more about Tia and book a session with her by visiting her website, tiameredith.com, and all of her information will be in the show notes as well. So Tia, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Lindsay. I mean, you're so right. We've gone back. It's so strange, like how many years, and then we came back together at such a pivotal time for you to really get you into that state of expression, which is just who you are, you know? So that warrior lives in you. And I've loved watching you bloom and watching your words come alive on the page. So the gratitude is here, my friend, for sure.
Thank you. The feeling is mutual. So Tia, to kick us off here, I would love for you to share with everyone how your own personal journey with your awakening, with the spirit world unfolded, and how you arrived at where you are in your life here and now today.
I really had to think about this question because being so immersed in the spiritual community and because of where I work and then just the friends that I have, so often you hear about, folks are like, I came in and I was awake, and I had psychic interactions, and I had none of that. Like I was just like flatline chilling in Missouri. I mean, I try to pull it in my mind, like when it happened as a kid. And I was like, I really don't. I just remember writing poetry in my like little purple diary with a key. But I think when it really happened, unfortunately or fortunately, is I was in a very abusive relationship when I lived in Seattle. And it took that. My mom had actually watched a show, an Oprah show way back. And she saw this book by Eckhart Tolle and she mailed it to me at the time. And I was just like, what's this about? And it just kind of sat there and it chilled. But when I was really at the depths of that, that relationship, and I had to run away. I actually had to leave and run away. And I got a job in DC at the time. I was working for the federal government, but it really took the rock bottom because I don't know why I have to be that kind of hard-headed individual, but it was then that I remember sitting on the edge of the bed of this person that I was with at the time, and they were just kind of screaming at me and just having like a furious kind of meltdown. And I heard very distinctly to my core, like from the top of my head down, that just said, run. But I didn't run. But that was really the moment. Like it was so shaking to my core and my soul that when I look back, I really think that was the moment that I realized that it wasn't just me. There was other guidance. There was something beyond that was trying to support and uplift and love me home. But like I was saying, that caused me to leave and go to DC because I had to run away. People who've dealt with narcissists or abusers know that a lot of times you have to run, go, no contact. There's a lot around that. And that's what catapulted the journey. And I wound up finding a spiritual teacher in that area and started studying A Course in Miracles, and then just wound up leaving and going to Greece. And that's when it really kicked up. That's when I really knew this was my path. And I guess, I'm not really sure about awakening, I don't know how to classify that, but I think in that space, when I lived in Greece, it was like, oh, it's different now, it's me and it's the team now. Yeah.
That's so impactful because I think so many people can relate to these rock bottom moments where there is something about our life that is very clearly not working anymore that serves as a catalyst for change, right? Because we're humans, like you said, right? Why do I need to have these rock bottom moments? But we're so motivated by our pain. And
Yes.
so as much as it's horrific to have to experience these things, in hindsight, when we then see the evolution or the unfolding of where it takes us, we might be able to at least find some peace around the purposefulness of the experience. And so can I ask you, when you think about Greece and why it came this connection point, because it sounds like it was a connection point for you with, whether we want to say like home, spirit, right, the universe, what facilitated that connection for you? Was it a period of going inward and getting quiet and meditation, or was it this freedom and expansion of just being able to be without fear? What I'm curious about that experience and how that, led you back to that connection point.
Well, what was wild about Greece to me is, like you had mentioned, I was born and raised in Missouri. Like I have my mom was an RN, my dad worked in a factory. It wasn't like you had these dreams of travel, like, and just my age too. It wasn't like nobody was doing like nomadic life and all of that. So this is why, I bring that to the surface because this is that moment where you have to connect back and say there's something other than you nudging you, because there was nothing prior to this nudging. And I just remember being in Seattle and getting really excited out of nowhere to travel to Greece, like just nowhere. I wasn't watching any movie. And I remember at the time speaking about this to other people, and they just immediately tamped it down. They were just like, that's silly, that's stupid. Like, why would you want to do that? And so when I ran away and I was in DC, it awakened again. And I had the resources because I was pretty far in my corporate career then. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do this. I don't know why, but I'm going to go. And I took a vacation for 2 weeks to Greece at that time. And to be really honest, all I did was cry. Like I was in one of the most beautiful places in the world. And I was like on Mykonos and Santorini. And I was just bawling, like just big sunglasses crying. But there was something that was healing in me that I knew at the time I needed to, like they were tears that I had never shed. I had just been so repressed for so long. And so when I came back to DC, everybody kind of remarked to me in the office, like, first of all, my skin looked fantastic because there's nothing like Greek sun. I was quite beautiful. And then I was just so calm. I was so peaceful. And I just never was like that. I was just very high tension, stress. And a friend of mine at the time, I remember calling her and talking to her about this experience. And she said, I've known you for 3 years and I've never heard you sound this way. I don't know what you have to do to go back, even if it's for 2 months, 3 months, but you need to go. You need to go. And for some reason, I just needed that permission slip. I needed somebody to tell me that it was okay. But because I'm an Aries, I can't ever do anything kind of. So I just burned my whole world to the ground and I quit. I was like shy of an 11-year career and I got a visa and I moved and I arrived with 2 suitcases and nowhere to stay really. I had a hotel, but I had nowhere to live. And then that's just where it began. But the impetus was just that nudge, right? So it had to have come from something, not me, not my ego, not Tia presented here, but it was so important for me to say yes. But I still had to ask. As you notice, I still had to ask somebody. Is it cool?
I think we all need that permission sometimes, right? When, especially the more crazy the ideas feel within us, or it's really probably they feel crazy in our mind, but there's a knowing in our body that it's the right decision. And this is why it's so important to be surrounded by tribe members, right? Or like-minded support so that we can make those big leaps when we need a little bit of the encouragement. So what happened once you moved to Greece?
So I wound up working as a travel agent and which was very different, from my career in the federal government. And what really happened in Greece was I had to come back to myself. I was so alone for the first time. And I'd been single for a very long time before that. But I mean, this was an aloneness. This was, I can't speak the language. I don't know where I'm at. How do I, order a coffee? Just these it forced me into a childlikeness that I couldn't have anticipated or even thought about. And that silence and that space gave me an opportunity to really dig into my spiritual practice at the time, because I didn't really have friends. I didn't have anything to do yet. I didn't have any dudes. I didn't have anything. So, and I just remember walking and crying. Like I said, there's a lot of themes of crying in Greece, but it also opened me up, and I traveled alone and I wound up going to Delphi. And when I went to Delphi alone, I started to awaken memories of being there before. And I had never had that experience, of oh no, I know what this is for. And I remember there's this massive rock when you're walking toward what they talk about where the oracles were and where know thyself, that stone is. There's this massive boulder there. And there was this crack that was through the middle. And I walked by it and I said, oh, I know why that crack's there. There was an earthquake. And it just went into my head. And I wasn't a person, I didn't study Greece. I didn't study Greek mythology. I knew nothing. And I went and looked it up later, and there had been an earthquake in that area. So there was just things awakening because I was on the grid there. This is many years later. I can look back and say, oh, now I understand, but it was activating. And I feel like the reason I had to go to Greece was because I needed to collect parts of my soul that I had been there so many times before. But it wasn't collecting in terms of pain. I needed to collect power. There was power in the earth for me there. And I was ready to take those pieces back in.
That's amazing. I feel like when we talk about these past lives, or we talk about, memories awakening, I think I'm hearing people refer to this more and more. And where that piece of the awakening, where it's just a remembering of a tidbit of information, like an earthquake or like a gift that maybe you have that you want to share with the world. And I'm curious, when you start piecemealing these little bits and pieces of your soul together, what emerged cumulatively now as you look back on that years later? Where did that bring you?
I think going to Greece was really the activation point of courage. It was a lot to get there, but there was an empowerment in that space. There was a shedding of a fear, because I'm kind of Greece is still a very male dominated kind of vibe. I don't know. I don't want to skew it a certain way, but it has a feeling and it's very masculine dominated. So it's a lot to be a woman alone there. And there's the earthy part of it and there's a spiritual part, but really to collect that part, to collect the spiritual aspects of myself, to remember the times that I was an oracle, that I was a priestess. Many of us were, they always talk about one oracle. Boo. There were many of us there. Hate to ruin that for folks. And I was one of many that were there. So I was activating and bringing that, but I wasn't using it yet. It's like you're saying, when you go back, then I'm like looking, because I wasn't a person and I'm not a person that's like, here's this huge break open. And I've always like envied folks that was their experience, but it's not. Like for me, it's very much like step by step. And you can kind of just see where it's like, okay, here's my spiritual part rising. And now my earthly side has to rise. And it's kind of like little by little so that it stays balanced. And I don't know if that's really clearly articulating what you're looking for, but I would just say as a whole, Greece really activated that courage point for me, and also a creative piece for sure.
Yeah. And the thing that strikes me about your story too is especially being somebody who does not deal well with uncertainty. That is one of my top challenges to navigate currently, and I think in general through my lifetime. But it strikes me the level of uncertainty you chose to dive into with 2 suitcases. Let me just pack up and move on, move to Greece and have a hotel, but not really know what comes after that. And given, a number of your life experiences, right, where you're just, okay, I need to get out of here. I need to run. How do you navigate that level of uncertainty in your life?
I always say you have to be a little bit dumb, to be honest. You really have to like tune into the dumbery, because if you really try to think it out, you'll crumble. You'll crumble. And I think there's a point in life that your trust and faith meet you. And I think I'm more to that point now where the trust and faith is starting to level out, where it's like, instead of falling forward, I'm leaping into the uncertainty. But really, if I think about Greece, I just fell into it. I just kind of did a trust fall backward and said, let's see what's happening. But I think that there's ways that life trains you to be that way. And I don't think I recognized that until this exact moment as we're talking, because when I was about 15, turned 16, my brother was in college. He played Division I football. He was on scholarship. He was gone. And it was just me and my mom. My parents had divorced by this point, and my mom got leukemia and she went to the hospital for a year. And for a year, we didn't live in a good neighborhood. And for a year, I lived alone. And my father didn't know what I was doing. He didn't care if I was eating, if I was going to, school, my grades. So I was really just there, and I was in the room actually with my mom in the hospital when she coded blue. And I'm just bringing that up because that is a level of uncertainty at 16 that no one deserves to walk that path. But I think when I look back, it was training me going forward. Like if you can survive that when you're 16, because that's definitely survival, then what's moving to Greece? And I think that people don't really look at places that they have been courageous or they have leapt into uncertainty, because everyone really has. But I think that what you have to move out of the way is that you're going to be comfortable. Because that's the lie. It's always uncomfortable. And even for me, that this has become some weird Phoenix energy I've erupted into in my 40s, but it really is just being as comfortable as you can, or just accepting. That's a fairer word. You accept the discomfort.
Yeah. So that was going to be one of my questions. Do you ever get comfortable with discomfort, or is it more of an allowing?
Yeah, it's an allowing. I hate it every time, every single time. Look, I mean, I can't say enough how stubborn I am. And Spirit has been working with me for a long time, and I still push back and throw tantrums. And I'm just like, really, this is what we're doing. So yeah, I just want to give everyone permission. Like, it's just really it's not a pretty show back here. I think that there are times though, what I've noticed about myself over time though, is I'll get excited. Like there's this spike of excitement. And that's how I know, like how I've grown, quote unquote, because I get a little excited about the discomfort, but then I fall back into the I'm annoyed and I don't want to do it. Yeah.
I think that's just so honest and real because I have a lot of uncertainty in my own life right now. And that's what there are just these moments of non-acceptance of where I'm at on the journey. And there's nothing really wrong either, right? Like I'm fully supported. Everything's good. Everything's taken care of. And yet that's what the grip of uncertainty and the grip of it in your physical body, I think can be overwhelming with sensations. And to your point about the mind and not letting the mind infiltrate, because I think sometimes the mind infiltrates to create stories to justify the overwhelming anxiety or stress or whatever it is that we feel in our body that just exacerbates the whole suffering process.
Yeah. And I think one thing that you were talking about there that I think is just, I really want to pinpoint is you've accepted the truth of it. And I think that when you can be truthful with yourself, like I am uncomfortable. I don't like this. I am having anxiety. Like that is such a huge, huge thing that I think I've bypassed, I know in the past and I'm even a truth seeker. I prefer the truth. Even when it hurts, I would rather hear the truth. And there's something about that truly when you're getting into uncertainty, that truth will set you free and you're not so bound by the story. You're not so bound by the emotions because you're like, I am having emotion. I'm going to go through it. And that's just the truth of this. Knowing your own pattern, right?
Points for self-awareness, right? How our patterns are showing up constantly.
Yes.
But I think the one thing that I've always noticed about you, and for people, we'll put the link in the show notes to your podcast. Tia has a podcast called Courage Unknown. And when I listen to this podcast, the thing that always comes through to me in leaps and bounds is your authenticity. And it always feels to me that you've just arrived at this place of such deep self-acceptance around your stories, your journey, and in a way where, because they're vulnerable shares, what you're sharing on there strikes me as very vulnerable information. And yet, because it feels like you've arrived at this place of self-acceptance, it comes across more just as authenticity. And I don't know if you agree with my perception of your voice and your words, but I'm curious, as a courage coach, like what was it like for you to arrive at that place of self-acceptance around these things that are highly, highly vulnerable?
Well, first of all, thank you for feeling like that's I think that, and I think you can agree with this too, as you step your voice out into the world, it's kind of almost like you're speaking into a void. And so it's very interesting and also loving and beautiful to hear back what's reflected to you and what you've brought, into existence. And I think, I don't know that I have arrived at full self-acceptance. I do think, first of all, getting into my 40s has been one of the most beautiful things in my life. And it really has had more to do with focusing where it was proper and letting go of the things that you'll hear it that no longer serve you, which just seems like such a platitude. But it's really, the self-acceptance had more to do with me stopping to focus on everyone else, like as an empath and a feeler, and just, man, I'm so in everybody's energy field. And it's like, well, who am I? And that curiosity back to who am I, and always being willing to adjust and redefine who I am is perhaps why it feels like there's that level of self-acceptance, because I have this oracle deck, this Isis oracle deck, and there's a card in there that I love deeply, and it's called She of 10,000 Names. And in the card, it talks about how, you're a writer, a poet, a lover, a mother, a father. Like you'll have all these labels and you're all of these identities and you're none of them at all. And I feel like that's the case with that feeling into self-acceptance. I am all these labels and I'm none at all. So how can I remain curious and evolve with myself and still love myself through my mistakes, through my pains. How can I actually celebrate myself? That's a new one that I haven't done in the past. So I think that's maybe why it feels that way. It's you're hearing my exploration to compassionate love of myself.
Thank you for sharing that. Authenticity, I think you're bringing up such a good point, because authenticity strikes me as we can only be as honest about who we are as we know our truth to be in any given moment. And I think that's what you're reflecting here, or what I hear you saying, right? It's like giving ourselves this permission to be who we were, shed those layers as it no longer serves us, and allow this uncovering of our true essence over time, right? Which is probably why the 40s I started feeling, really, really good, and we're more confident and more assured in conviction of who we are and who we're not. And so I think that's important, though, with authenticity, for people to recognize that we have to give ourselves permission to be who we were and be who we are now, and not have this fixed idea of who we're supposed to be. And our society makes that so freaking hard sometimes, because we constantly have these projections of what we should do and who we should be and how we should show up, that muddy who we feel like we are. And it's hard enough figuring out who you are without all the projections layered onto it. So I'm on a tangent or a ramble here, but
I don't think so. I think that these are all big truths. I think these are things that folks need to hear. Like, this is the truth. And it's the way that it starts in your family. It starts in your family unit. I was the one that you could depend on. I'm the one that holds all the responsibility. I'm the caregiver. That label was placed on me very, very young. And it was a very big burden to carry, and it was heavy. And it doesn't mean that there's not aspects of truth of that, to arrive as a healer, to come out of the closet as a healer. There's a part of the space that I hold that's appropriate to carry. But what no one taught me then was you can put that down. And so I'm sitting here just continually piling on my shoulders this identity and these worries and burdens of everyone else. And so it's really, I think, important for people to understand that it is society, it is your family unit, and it's really hard to decondition from that stuff. That is a whole journey in itself, the deconditioning process.
Yeah. And I think there can be a grief process associated with all of this. And maybe this is some of what you were feeling in Greece too, where it's like grieving the lie that we thought of who we thought we were, or who we thought we had to be, and like letting go of that loss of self-perception. It still feels like a loss. It's counterintuitive, I find, because we're like, this is a good thing to discover the truth of who you are and lean more into your authentic self. And it is. But I do find that there's a grief process associated with the shedding. Do you find that as well?
1,000%. And when I originally started doing courage coaching, there's this formula that's just kind of formulating in my head. And step one is the letting go, but step two is the grief. That is it, because you can't get to that you can't create the space for the goodies that are coming if you haven't honored the past. And honoring the past doesn't feel good. 9 times out of 10, it doesn't, because I can't tell you how many times in my life, as I've made these leaps after leaps, that I'm just like, who am I? And that's a beautiful question. And it's a painful question. And you're just kind of out here floating, like, what do you want me to do? Because you thought you were this person, and spirit strips that away and says, not anymore. Now what's next? And you kind of float for a while, and it's very uncomfortable.
It is. You're articulating something that I've been feeling recently, which is this sensation of I'm not the person that I have always been, and I'm not yet the person that I feel I'm becoming and unfolding into. And so it's this liminal space, and floating is the perfect way to describe that. I hadn't thought about it in that way, but it is. And you can't force or push that journey any faster than you're ready for. And there
Absolutely.
are all of these levels and layers in the process of, shedding a little bit and then shedding a little bit more. And cumulatively, it ends up being a whole heck of a lot, but we don't even realize the burden that we're carrying in the process.
Absolutely.
So for you, as we're talking about authenticity and talking about, coming out of the spiritual closet, this transference training sounds like it was a really big part of your integration. So can you share a little bit more? I don't even know what transference training is, but
No,
can you
I didn't
share?
either. I didn't either. And if it's okay, if I can put it in a little bit of context.
Of course.
So last year, the Hubs and Pug and I had left the United States and come to Croatia. And then we got here and things just kind of fell apart. And we got forced into this journey like through Europe, and we wound up in the UK. So I just need to kind of put it in that context. And again, it's like coming to me as we're talking, this like really disruptive kind of like tower card crumble that often rebirths me in this really beautiful way that I don't expect. And I also don't appreciate spirit, but that's cool. So I wound up in the UK, and a person that I'm friends with lives in Glastonbury, and I had never heard of Glasto. That's what they call it. Glasto. I had never heard of it really. And I wound up going to see my friend, and I walked past this store, and it's called Halo Avalon. And it was so magnetizing to me. It was like all these like white Marys, like the whole front was just like this magical set of statues. And I was just like, what's happening in here? And I just kind of floated inside. That's how I felt like. I felt like I just kind of floated inside the store. And I wound up not knowing at the time that I met my teacher. And this is her store, and she owns it with her husband. And, we were just talking or whatever. But I wound up, I mean, it's not the coolest story in the world, so I'm trying to make it a little bit cooler. But I wound up talking to her and then looking at her website later. Like I kept feeling this pull there, and I was like, I don't understand. And digging through the website, there was this fundamental transference healing training, and it was like within this time frame that I was still in this part of the UK, and it was not cheap, friends. It was not cheap. And I look and I go, I guess I'm going to this. I don't know why, but I guess I'm going. And that was the catalyst I wound up taking fundamental. And then I wound up going up to Scotland and coming back down to take advanced. And so I'm going to take teacher training soon. And so it like really ignited something in me, but it took this violent shake to the ground. Like every time I'm always with 2 suitcases, Lindsay, I realize I'm with 2 suitcases. So like 2 suitcases and our dog, and we're just like going. But yeah, somehow I find my way back home in that kind of very odd, uncertain chaos. But that's how I found it. And it's training it was brought onto this plane by Alexis Cartwright. She's still very much with us. It's out of Australia, and my teacher's also an Aussie, but she had left to anchor this energy in Glastonbury. And so she works very closely with Alexis. But yeah, I think it's something more well known in Australia, but there are folks around, but there's only a handful of practitioners in the United States.
Which is super awesome that you're then bringing, I mean, I know you're overseas, but still connected well to people in the States. What's the premise of the work?
So what's interesting about transference healing to me is it's definitely a technology. It's definitely something to me, if I'm going to just talk about it in my own words, it's this Atlantean, Lemurian, that kind of root. But there's sacred geometry, there's color, there's sound, there's animal magic. It's this culmination of so many things brought together. And that's why I love it, because that's what I feel like. I feel like I'm all of these things, right? I'm all of these things and none of them at all. And so transference healing really fit me in that way.
It's fascinating that you're saying this, because I've recently had my own Atlantean memories resurface in the last 2 weeks. And I feel like you are giving me some messages and all of this about some guidance that I was waiting for. And I feel like I just want to point out to people in the audience, like, this is how it happens. This is how spirit works. Tia and I did not plan on talking about this today. Now when we get off this call, I'm going to have to go pick her brain about a few other things with regard to this, but this is it, right? Like, just like you were saying, you're showing up at the shop and it's just this inkling of curiosity, like what's in there? I feel like I need to go. And now I feel like I need to scope out this website and dive deeper into this. And I feel like so many people are trying to figure it out. Like, what am I supposed to do? What's the thing? And I'm guilty of it too, because that's what our minds want to do. They just want to figure it out. What's my purpose? What's my fill in the blank? And our minds go out in search of like how to make it happen in a pushing and forcing way. But everything that you've described so beautifully today in terms of your own unfolding, it was just a moment, a nudge, a feeling of enthusiasm or excitement, a breadcrumb that you followed that continued to feel right within you or exciting. And I feel like that's spirit at work, right? They always put the exact person, that you need, whether it's a piece of information like you just gave me, or, it's a hit or thread that you can follow that's going to connect all of these seemingly random dots. And so I just love being able to see that in your own story, how you just articulate this so wonderfully and just following your heart, which is, I think, the problem, right? So many of us are disconnected from our heart because we're so in our head about things. So how do you stay conscious to staying connected to your heart as you're moving through your life? And really, you've had a really uncertain year behind you, right? I mean, it just sounds like crazy levels of uncertainty.
Yeah, it was as we were calling it in our household, it was the year of YOLO. It's just what it is. And like, I'm just dragging my husband with me, like, just bear with me. This is what you signed up for, sir. I think honestly, though, transference healing is what has brought me more into my heart, because I tend to be very cerebral and I love to think. I love thinking. I love imagining. I mean, it's part of my creative spirit as a writer. Like, it's a channeling, but I get too cerebral, and I get cerebral in the wrong way. And then I spiral out into, all the worry. So transference healing is very much focused in your heart and opening up the chambers of your heart. So I think more so as you see me move forward, I'll actually have more heart-centered decisions than I've had in the past. But because I'm so cerebral, it requires me to physically move my body in order to get present into my body, to get into my heart. And that's a practice that needs to really come into play, that Spirit's been showing me this year, because for me, that's like a hack or a trick to say, get out of your head, get into your heart. But yeah, that's what I plan to do going forward.
Yeah. So that's a great tool and technique for people to use. Are there other things that you have as part of your daily spiritual practice right now that feel like they really help center you, ground you, and connect you to those higher realms?
I feel like really I do these transference healing sessions on myself. Like, I am in it, and it's a really intense practice. It's not like, oh, I'm just going to kind of sit here and chill out with my eyes closed. Not saying that that's not difficult, because it is. I'm still not any good at it. But it's a very elaborate kind of set of tools and techniques that you go through. And that is really grounding me and what I need, because what I found out as well is that my heart space, to get there, right, to be in my body, requires me to be really connected to the earth. And so I'm really gritting in this new way that I never have. I'm consciously gritting. I'm consciously feeling into the mother and saying, hi, I'm here. Like, I'm back in Croatia. Hi, I'm here. Is it cool? Am I on the right node? Like, let me know. So I don't know. I mean, there's nothing. Yeah, I don't know that I can share anything beyond that, but it's just really, this is my practice. Transferring healing is my practice. And it's also what I'm sharing with other people.
I think that's such a great point too, though. A lot of us right, I'm a breathwork practitioner. I do hand analysis. I have like a buffet of things I do, but every single one of those things I went after because I was trying to help myself. right? And they were things that helped support me on my journey and were so impactful for me that I decided to share it with others because I felt like it could help. But they're ultimately all tools that I have as part of my toolbox. And so I think that's such an important message for people to hear. It's like, you don't have to go out in search of like, what can make me money, right? What can I do to have a side hustle? I mean, sure, you can lean into it in the mind, but most people that I talk to who are doing this type of work and coming from a place of integrity where they're walking their talk have adopted these practices because it's what they needed to support themselves through their own healing journey.
Absolutely. And I remember telling my teacher when I was taking, because when you take fundamentals, you can only work on yourself and your friends and family. And it's not until you take advanced and sit with Alexis that you're able to charge for your services. But I remember telling Rena's my teacher, I was like, I don't know that I want to take advanced because I know if I take it, Spirit's going to ask me to share this with other people. And I don't want to. Meaning, I just didn't, because I wasn't stepped into the acceptance of being a healer. Like, so this is the thing, like we go back to the self-acceptance. And I mean, that's just a very truthful share. Like, this is something I haven't wanted to do. I didn't want to do it. I wanted to be over here, being a writer, doing my marketing thing. And they're like, no, that's not the path. And do you trust us? And are you going to follow this? And so that's how I've arrived in this space. And I continue to arrive, right? It's always a continuation. But I just wanted to share that with you. I don't know why. So I'm just like, blah, blah, blah. There it is.
No, I love it because we all have that, right? I mean, I spent years like closeted as a hand analyst before I ever decided to more fully step into it. And you can see this. So many of us are hiding, right? Like we have all of these masks that we wear. And so we come out of the closet in certain areas and then we're still, right, closeted in others. That's the unfolding. That's what it's about. But I think you're bringing up a good point, which is just, we have to lean into the fear in order to see what it is that's preventing us from fully stepping into whatever it is that Spirit's asking us or encouraging us to do. And they're not, I find that they know how to get us where we most need to be through the path of least resistance. And although I may not like the path that they've chosen for me all the time, it is always perfect. Like I'm always in awe of in hindsight, when I look back and I'm like, wow, well played, Spirit, because I never would have concocted some of the scenarios or situations that play out to help me move energy or help trigger a fear within me so that I can look at it, address it, and move forward. And when we embrace these opportunities, we can shift things really quickly. But some of the things that I'm hearing from you too, from this conversation, is you seem like you have a really great perspective on some of these things, right? Whereas I feel like I'm kind of want Debbie Downer. I definitely am more inclined to like be the glass is half empty. Former coworkers used to call me doom and gloom, like about 15 years ago, but it was accurate, right? Because I thought I was being a realist, and they were like, no, doom and gloom over here, right? Because I was so protective that I couldn't look to that higher perspective. But as I'm hearing some of these things from you, you're reminding me how we view situations is so important. Whether we choose to feel excited or anxious, there's a very slight difference of that feeling in the body that we can easily misconstrue. I know for me, sometimes I'm really excited, but if I look at that through a lens of anxiety, it feels more like worry than excitement. And it's such a small shift. But as you were talking about making these leaps and following the nudges and just kind of letting go and relaxing into, all right, Spirit, I'm just going to trust you. It strikes me that your perspective is a big piece of this too.
Yeah, I think I've always been more naturally leaning in that direction for whatever reason. And I think, not to bring astrology up so much, but I do feel like Aries have that tone. Like we're kind of like the starters, and we have this like optimism, even when it's kind of like, why? And, we were talking about perspective. It made me think about, I was telling a friend of mine, I don't know, we were reflecting back on this like year of YOLO that we were kind of talking about. And she said, you lived my biggest fear. And I was like, what do you mean? And she goes, you were homeless. And I literally never had that perspective. Like,
Yeah.
it was like, wow. And I was jazzed because I was like, I never thought about it that way. And I mean, I still don't, but I was like, I could see where that, because I had no lease contract. I didn't have a house I owned. We didn't have a car anymore. I was like, oh yeah, that could be the vibe, but it's just that it's a different perspective. And I guess part of it, I'm just wanting to share it with you because you don't even see that there are other perspectives. Like, I didn't even realize that. So I was actually quite thrilled to hear some other perspective. I was like, oh,
which is such a gift. As a Capricorn, I'm way in the like melancholy of life, right? That is like that
we
is
love you
my
though.
life's
I'm
work.
rising Capricorn, so I'm not,
All
I
right, so
get
you
it.
feel
I'm a
me.
real. Yes, I mean, there's definitely a realism, and I think that that's a fair thing to say. There is that. I guess sometimes it can come across Debbie Downer, but there is a realism, and I'm willing to say the truth and look at that path, and so that's the beauty.
That's how I like to look at it too, is maybe it helps us look at the truth of situations, but also uh, needing to connect into the magic and miracles of life as well, right? Because there really isn't any problem that's too big for spirit to solve. And I think that's what we can lose sight of when we're in the throes of our very earthly egoic stories and patterns. So, what are some of the ways that you feel like magic and miracles play out in your own life?
It's interesting because I see them more now, and they're more like these nudges. They're not these big, grandiose kind of moments. I have had a couple of them over time, but usually it's just like these gifts, or it's like a smile, or some way that someone helps me, or it's never, that's the wrong word. It's just not a grandiose gesture. I think the most profound, like magic, what would be kind of categorized that way, is I had trained in Seraphim Blueprint. And I remember going to bed that night and thinking something's going to happen. I don't know what it is, but something's going to happen, because there's a lot of initiations in that process. And I went to sleep, and I mean, my husband's next to me, and it's like that I'm oriented. I'm still in San Diego then. So I'm very oriented in the space, like where I am. I'd lived there for like 7 years. And the room, I remember waking up, right? Not really waking up, but waking up. And the room was this strange shade of green. And my mother walked in, and my mother had been passed away, I don't know, 2016. So, many years at that point. And I had this full-blown conversation with my mother for like an hour. And so those are the times that I feel like spirit really is showing me that I've grown, and is like giving me this magic of like, no, there is this other reality. When we talk about multiple dimensions, like that's real. And I'm a person that I need that experience. I'm so experiential. So magic to me has more to do with like very tangible things that you would see and notice. So like they have to blow my mind, because because in a lot of ways I am very tactical and tangible, and it can be difficult for me to say, oh yeah, I could have this mystical experience. Like an angel could kind of just, woo, here they are. Like that can happen.
Yeah.
There's still aspects of that have not been part of my experience.
But it sounds like you've had cool experiences where they're like trying to make them tactical. And I think that's the thing I like to get across to people is spirit's going to use whatever you need. And that's why our journeys are so different. That's why our gifts are so different in terms of like how spirit works to get through to each one of us, because they have to use with what we're going to be able to buy into on some level, right? Like we really don't make it easy on ourselves. I feel oftentimes have this image of spirit. Like if you could imagine my life as a fire in a barrel, I always picture spirit standing around this like fire in a barrel, being like, what's she gonna blow up next, right? And what do we need? Where are we gonna need to lead her as a result? And I say it in jest because it just makes the journey a little bit more humorous, so that we're not crying the whole way through, right? But
for real.
Yeah. But it is amazing how these little, whether it's, this hour-long experience with your mother and spirit that you get to have, right, that moment, and I can't even imagine the healing that must have resulted from an experience like that, to these little things, right? Like a conversation or a friend said the exact thing that you needed to hear in the moment that you needed to hear it to propel you to the next level. And I think the more we are aware of the fact that it happens, the more our minds go out in search of the evidence that it continues to be there, as opposed to back to the perspective, right? If we're like shutting it down or we're not open to seeing any of it, then it's not that it's not happening, we just miss it all.
Yeah, they have to bum rush me. They have to, it has to be surprises, because I can get very like earthy and tactical, like I was saying. And we, signed a lease here in Croatia. And I just, it was like the spontaneous thing, right? Air quotes, spontaneous. A realtor calls, can we go look at it now? Yeah, let's go look at, no plans to go see this place. We walk in, it's absolutely magical. And we're like, we're signing it today. Like, we got it. And then after the fact, I was like, Tia, maybe you want to do the numerology on that, because I'm that kind of nerd. I'm going to numerology the stuff out of that like address. And I went back and it was a 9. And it's like all about nurturing this gift of healing and then giving it to others. And it's a sanctuary. And so to come out as a healer and now to go move into the space that's energetically set to support that growth, I was like, that's just spirit doing its thing right there. I mean, that's magic, right?
That is magic, and flow and synchronicity. Like, that's how the magic unfolds when you're open to it, right? Like, when we try to force stuff to happen, that's when we screw it all up. Honestly, we just get in our way. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I'm so, so grateful that you were so open and vulnerable and sharing with the audience. So how can my listeners support you?
I would love for them. You can follow me on Instagram at Tia Meredith Writer, or you can visit on my website, tiameredith.com. Those are the 2 best places to find me. And Lindsay, thank you so much for asking. I knew it was going to be a fun ride. So we didn't know where it was going together, and I loved it. I love the uncertainty of it.
Me too. Thank you again. Thank you so much for listening to the Guided Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would be so grateful if you would share it with a friend, or even leave me a review so we can ensure that it makes its way into the ears of listeners who need to hear these messages most. Until next time, may you remember how guided you truly are.